The reporter came ready to provoke. She asked the same explosive question over and over. Until Crockett finally said what no one else would. And made a move the internet couldn't stop talking about. It started like any other press event outside the Capitol. Folding chairs half filled with journalists. Wires snaking around their feet. Lenses clicking into place. And the sound of traffic from nearby Independence Avenue. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium. Cool and prepared, with a stack of folders under her arm. And the American flag behind her. She wasn't new to tension. But today's energy felt different, heavier. The air was thick, not with humidity. But with people waiting for her to slip. Hello friends, if you new here then don't forget to hit subscribe button, and if you like then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video. She took a breath, adjusted the microphone. And launched into her opening remarks. About the proposed voting rights bill. Her voice was steady. Clear. She touched on redistricting. Access to absentee ballots. And protections for poll workers. Every word was measured. Every pause intentional. Then came the questions. It started with the usual suspects. AP, Reuters. Even someone from a local CBS affiliate in Kansas. A question about expected GOP pushback. One about turnout data. Another about the timeline for the bill. Crockett answered each with practiced ease. She'd done her homework. She wasn't rattled. But then from the third row, right side, came a sharp voice. Congresswoman Crockett. What are you doing to address the real issue? Election fraud? The woman asking the question stood out immediately. She wore a fire engine red MAGA cap. Sunglasses pushed up over her head. And a press badge clipped to a lanyard that read, Patriot Truth Network. Her voice was loud. Not angry, but charged. Like she wasn't just asking. She was accusing. Crockett didn't flinch. She looked her dead in the eye and responded calmly. We've seen no credible evidence of widespread election fraud. What we're doing is protecting the right to vote. Period. But the woman didn't nod. Didn't take notes. Didn't even lower her hand. Instead, she asked the same question again. Word for word, this time louder. Then she added. Why are you covering up what we all know happened? In Arizona and Georgia? There was a flicker in Crockett's expression. Not fear, not confusion. Just the quick processing of someone realizing. This wasn't going to be a normal exchange. I'm not here to debate conspiracy theories. Crockett replied. Let's stay on topic, please. The crowd stirred. Some murmurs. A cameraman from NBC leaned forward. A woman from NPR pursed her lips. Everyone could feel it. A moment trying to happen. Still, Crockett pressed forward. She called on someone else. Gave an answer about early voting access in Pennsylvania. But the red-headed reporter wasn't done. She interrupted again. Same question. Same tone. Only this time, she took a step forward from her seat. Why are you dodging the truth? You swore an oath, Congresswoman. The rest of the press corps looked at each other. Not because they agreed or disagreed. But because they were uncomfortable. The woman's voice cut through the air like broken glass. Crockett, still at the podium, glanced down at her notes but didn't read from them. She stared ahead, then said calmly. If you continue interrupting, I'll have to ask you to stop. Everyone here deserves the right to speak. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was firm. The woman smirked and leaned back in her chair. For a second, it felt like it was over. Like maybe she'd made her point. And would fade back into the noise. But that pause? That wasn't surrender. It was a setup for something bigger. The moment the press moved on, it felt like the tension had cleared briefly. A young reporter from the Pittsburgh Gazette was mid-question about ballot drop box security, when the red hat cut through again. Are you going to answer the question? Or just keep pretending everything's fine? This time, there was no waiting her turn. No raised hand. Just her voice. Louder than before, echoing through the small cluster of cameras and microphones. Crockett's expression didn't change, but her body stiffened slightly at the podium. Her hands, previously relaxed on either side of her binder, now gripped the edges of the lectern. I've already answered your question, she replied, her voice still measured. Let's not waste anyone's time. The red-headed woman leaned forward again, now clearly standing, her notepad dangling at her side. So you're saying you don't care that hundreds of thousands of Americans don't trust the system? You call that leadership? Reporters shifted in their seats. Some sighed audibly. The man from Minnesota Public Radio shook his head and muttered, "This again." Crockett didn't respond right away. She let the silence carry weight. A few camera shutters clicked softly. Then she spoke, low and steady. I care about democracy. I care about facts. If you have a real question about policy, I'm here. If not, please stop disrupting those who do. The woman crossed her arms, not moving. My audience deserves answers. Even if your team's too scared to face tough questions. There it was. Not just a disagreement. Not just persistence. This was performance. A crafted moment for a clip. Crockett knew it. So did everyone else. You could see it in how the other reporters looked at her. Not out of fear, but with that quiet panic that comes when someone hijacks a room. That's when the interruptions turn tactical. Every time Crockett tried to pivot to another journalist, the woman would shout over. Not always questions. Sometimes just phrases. Loaded words. Election theft. Rigged ballots. Deep state. The chaos wasn't constant. But it was perfectly timed. Always hitting just as Crockett tried to bring the conversation back to the bill. Crockett began to speak in shorter, clipped sentences. She adjusted her posture. Her eyes narrowed. Not in anger, but calculation. Behind her, one of her aides, Sienna Rojas, a sharp and no-nonsense former school teacher from Toledo, stood off to the side, arms crossed tight. She didn't speak, but she gave Crockett a quick glance. Just one. Crockett nodded slightly. She understood. But she wasn't ready to escalate. Yet. Instead, she tried again. Next question, please. She pointed to a man from the Arizona Ledger. But before he could speak, the red-headed reporter barked out. Why are you afraid of the truth, Jasmine? The use of her first name caught attention. Everyone heard it. Crockett stopped mid-motion. Her shoulders squared. I'm not afraid of the truth, she said, slower now. I'm tired of shouting. The woman responded with a grin and said, loud enough for the mics to catch. That's what they always say when they're caught. This was no longer about information. It was performance art. It was a game. Crockett wasn't rattled. But she was being hijacked. The Dallas Morning Herald reporter next to the woman looked over and asked, flat out, can you please stop? We're all trying to do our jobs. The red-headed reporter turned and snapped. So am I. Just because you don't like the question doesn't mean it shouldn't be asked. There it was again. Deflection. Making herself the victim. Turning disruption into narrative. Crockett glanced toward the edge of the crowd, where Capitol security stood at attention. She didn't make a move. Not yet. Her instincts told her, this wasn't finished. She leaned forward into the mic. Her voice was quieter now, but unmistakable. You can ask anything. But not like this. Some people don't come for answers. They come for chaos. There was no formal announcement that things had shifted. But everyone felt it. The moment had cracked wide open. And the press conference was no longer about voting rights. It had become a standoff. Crockett at the center, trying to maintain order and purpose. The woman in the MAGA hat, now fully standing, working the crowd like a courtroom. And the press, caught between frustration and caution, unsure whether to keep asking their own questions, or just wait for the spectacle to end. Someone from the St. Louis Sentinel tried to bring it back. Congresswoman, how does this bill affect out-of-state college voters? But the woman cut him off. They don't care about students. They want to keep power by flooding the system. The man blinked, lowered his mic, and looked around. As if to say, are we seriously letting this happen? Crockett held up a hand. Not to silence, but to anchor the moment. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Not searching, but steady. I want to remind everyone here, she said slowly. This is a policy briefing. Not a courtroom. Not a campaign rally. We are here to serve the people. That includes keeping this space functional. The woman stepped forward. Functional? You mean filtered? Controlled? Sanitized for your narrative? It was the tone, sarcastic, but slick. That made it land like a slap. Crockett didn't answer. Instead, her eyes flicked toward her aide, Sienna, who gave the smallest nod of confirmation. Behind the scenes, Sienna was already texting the Capitol Police liaison. She wasn't new to this either. But Crockett. She was still buying time. She turned back to the crowd. Anyone else have a question, please? Someone did, thankfully. A woman from the Sacramento Tribune stood and spoke quickly, clearly trying to redirect attention. Yes, can you clarify how Section 5 will be implemented? In mid-size municipalities? Crockett was ready. She flipped to the correct page in her binder. Yes. In places like Springfield, Ohio or Erie, Pennsylvania. The bill provides direct federal support to municipalities with less than 300,000 residents. That includes voter education initiatives and lies, the red-headed woman yelled. You're just creating jobs for your donors. This time, the shout wasn't met with silence. A middle-aged man in a beige blazer turned around and snapped. You're not a journalist. You're a heckler. The MAGA woman didn't blink. You're just mad I'm asking what you won't. Crockett closed her binder. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply looked up, face bare of emotion. Enough, she said. No microphone, just her voice. The crowd froze. Not out of fear, but clarity. Everyone could feel it now. This wasn't just rude. It was a power play. Crockett took a step back and addressed the room. We are all professionals. Or we're supposed to be. If someone refuses to follow basic standards of conduct, they don't belong here. A few nods. Actual nods this time, from the other reporters. One woman even whispered, "Thank you." But the woman in the red hat, she scoffed. Now you want me gone just because I pushed back? Guess it's true what they say, Democrats only like free speech. When it flatters them. Crockett didn't look angry. She looked tired. There's a difference. There's a difference between free speech and hijacking a space where others are trying to do their jobs. This isn't a stage. It's not YouTube. And it's not a monologue. But the woman didn't move. And Crockett hadn't said the one thing that would force her to. Not yet. You could feel it coming before it happened. That tension in the room when a decision has been made. Even if no one says it out loud. Crockett glanced off to her left, where two Capitol Police officers stood by the steps, just out of the frame of most cameras. They weren't rushing in. They weren't making a scene. But they were ready. One of them, a tall officer with a thick brown mustache and a badge that read Ortega, gave a short nod in return. Not asking. Just acknowledging. Still, Crockett gave it one more shot. Not to de-escalate. She knew they were past that. But to give the moment a final chance. To land on reason. Not force. I've answered your question, she said, firmly, directly. You've made your point. But now you're disrupting others. This is your last warning. The woman didn't back down. She didn't even hesitate. She pointed a finger. Not aggressively. But with an air of righteousness. You're scared, that's what this is. You know, if people start really asking questions, your whole machine comes crashing down. A murmur passed through the crowd. One reporter let out a soft, exhausted Jesus. At that point, the officer stepped forward. Crockett didn't signal this time. She didn't have to. The press conference had been co-opted long enough. Ma'am, Officer Ortega said calmly. We're going to ask you to leave the premises. The woman spun around to face him. Her badge swinging on her chest. On what grounds? I'm press. I have credentials. You've been warned multiple times. You're interrupting official proceedings. You're being asked to leave. If you don't comply, we'll have to escort you out. The woman looked at Crockett, expecting her to stop it. To play the optics. To flinch. But Crockett didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched. And that silence. It said everything. The woman clutched her notepad and huffed. This is what tyranny looks like. Just remember, Congresswoman. Your arrogance won't save you from accountability. Even as she said it, she began walking slowly toward the back. A camera turned in her direction, catching every step. She was talking still. Mostly for the mic clipped to her collar. This is suppression of real journalism. This is why America's broken. Ortega and his partner didn't touch her. They just walked a few feet behind, guiding her toward the barrier. The cameras stayed on Crockett. She didn't blink. A woman from the Oregon Chronicle broke the silence. Can we continue, Congresswoman? Crockett looked around. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. Yes. She reopened her binder, found her place, and finished answering the previous question as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew something had. A moment had just been carved into the day. One that would be replayed, clipped, debated, and weaponized before sundown. Sienna leaned in toward Crockett's shoulder and whispered. Phones are already blowing up. Crockett whispered back. Let them blow. They kept moving forward. More questions were asked. Some reporters tried to return to the original policy topics. Others stayed quiet, unsure if their own media outlet would stand behind them. If they asked the wrong thing next. But the red-headed reporter wasn't gone. Not really. She was already uploading her footage. Already writing her tweet. Already editing that one moment. You've made your point, but now you're disrupting others. To frame herself as the victim of censorship. The internet wouldn't see the full exchange. Most wouldn't want to. They'd pick a side. They always do. But in that courtyard, under that blazing DC sun, it wasn't about sides. It was about control. And the quiet cost of having to keep it. But back inside the building, in the privacy of her office, Crockett was about to face a very different kind of pressure. It didn't take long. By the time Jasmine Crockett made it back to her office, room 2007 of the Rayburn building, her phone had already buzzed 12 times. Not calls. Notifications. Mentions. Screenshots. Clips. Sienna walked in just behind her, already pulling out her laptop. They clipped it, she said, setting the MacBook on the desk. 12 seconds. Just your face. And the part where you say, you're disrupting others. That's all they're sharing. Crockett slid into her chair. Eyes closed, just for a beat. 12 seconds to erase an hour of policy work, she murmured. Outside her window, the Capitol dome sat unmoved. Stoic, still. But inside this office, things were moving fast. Sienna clicked through the video already making the rounds. The MAGA reporter's footage had gone live. Shaky vertical phone video. Overexposed but perfectly framed. To make her look like a crusader for truth. No interruptions shown. No context. Just her being told to leave. The comments were what you'd expect. She exposed the truth and they silenced her. Another tyrant in a suit. They can't handle questions anymore. The video hit 100,000 views in under an hour. Crockett leaned back. She'd been here before. Not like this. But close. Angry DMs. Voicemails with threats. Misinformation spreading faster than facts. And the worst part? It worked. Not always. But often enough to leave a mark. Your staff's already getting calls, Sienna added. Some media asking for interviews. Others, looking for your comment. Fox wants a statement. So does Newsmax. Of course they do, Crockett replied. They don't care what I say. They just want a clip to react to. She stood and walked to the window. Not for reflection. But for grounding. Her hands pressed lightly against the sill. Her voice dropped. This isn't about her, she said. It never was. That woman wasn't there for answers. She was there to be removed. That was her moment. And you gave it to her, Sienna said gently. Not to scold. But to be honest. Crockett nodded. Yeah. I did. Silence lingered. Not awkward. Just heavy. Honest. Back in the hallway. A junior aide named Darnell poked his head in. Ma'am, there's something else. He held out a tablet. On it was a tweet. The red-headed reporter had just posted a new video. This time from her car, parked somewhere downtown. She was crying. Or at least trying to. Her voice cracked as she told her followers that she had been thrown out for asking a basic question. Crockett barely glanced at it. She'll get her podcast guest spot out of it. She's already scheduled on 2 shows tonight, Darnell confirmed. One of them's calling it the silencing of truth. Sienna let out a short breath through her nose. They're going to make this a movement. They already have. Crockett returned to her chair. And pulled her blazer off. Laying it across the armrest. You know what's funny, she said, half laughing. I didn't even raise my voice. No, Sienna said. You didn't. And that was the part that hit hardest. There had been no meltdown. No explosion. Just a quiet, professional boundary. But that's what made it powerful. And dangerous. To some people, control from a woman. Especially a black woman. Looks like arrogance. Or worse, fear. But the truth was, Crockett hadn't lost her cool. She had just refused to lose control of the room. That was her crime. "We'll put out a statement," Sienna said. "But we won't explain ourselves. We'll reinforce what the press already knows. Basic rules were broken. That's it." Crockett didn't argue. She knew the rules. Still, she looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. But they were tired. "I wonder if people will ever want more than drama again," she said quietly. But what she didn't know yet was that someone inside her own camp had been filming from another angle. And that clip was about to change everything. The video surfaced later that evening. Not from a major outlet. Not from a network affiliate. But from someone inside the building. Specifically, from a legislative intern named Casey Trong. Casey, a political science major from Iowa State, had been shadowing one of Crockett's junior staffers that week. She wasn't supposed to record anything. Especially not on a personal phone. But when the red-headed woman started shouting over other reporters, Casey had quietly hit record. She hadn't meant to cause waves. She just wanted the truth for herself. What she captured was everything. The viral clip had left out the multiple warnings, the tone, the interruptions, the disrespect toward other reporters. In her footage, Crockett didn't even look angry. She looked focused. Measured. You could hear the other journalists murmuring things like, "This is ridiculous," and "She won't stop." One even said, "She's ruining this for all of us." That's what people had missed. The truth wasn't loud. It was buried under the shouting. Casey uploaded the full video on her private account that night, with the caption, "Watch what really happened. This isn't what they're showing you." She had a few hundred followers. She wasn't trying to go viral. But within the hour, her video was picked up by a political fact-checker. Then retweeted by a journalist from the Philadelphia Standard. From there, it snowballed. By morning, her clip had over 2 million views. Inside Crockett's office, the atmosphere was different. Calmer. Not because things had gone away, but because the weight had shifted. Sienna pulled up the clip on the office monitor and turned to Crockett. "She saved us." Crockett sat at the round table, a mug of strong black coffee in hand, listening to the full playback. There were no edits. No music. Just raw footage. Real. "I don't even know her," Crockett said quietly. "Casey. She's interning with Ruben's team for the week." "Well," Crockett said, leaning forward. "Somebody get her a thank you basket before the weekend." They both smiled. It was the first moment of real relief in nearly 24 hours. Still, it didn't erase everything. The hate mail hadn't stopped. The phone still rang. The woman from the press conference had booked 3 more interviews, now claiming she was being followed by deep state operatives and hinting at legal action. But now, there was balance. For every angry message, there were comments like, "Just watch the full video. That woman was unprofessional." Crockett handled it with grace. Didn't realize she got 3 warnings before security stepped in. This changes things. Crockett exhaled slowly and stood from the table. She walked over to the window again. The same Capitol dome. Same skyline. But her view had shifted. "I'm not naive," she said. "They'll move on to something else by Monday. But today. Today we told the truth. That's rare." Sienna nodded. "You know. If you had yelled. If you'd lost it for even 1 second. That's all they would have needed. One frame. One screenshot. And it would have followed you for years." Crockett turned around and gave a small, knowing smile. "I didn't give them that. I gave them boundaries." She sat down again. Opened her laptop. And began writing. Not a public statement. But a journal entry. Something for herself. She didn't always have time for this. But after a day like that, she needed it. Capitol grounds. Friday afternoon. I remembered who I am. I don't owe chaos anything. And silence isn't weakness, when it's discipline. She paused. Thought for a second. Then closed the laptop. There was a knock on the door. Darnell again. "Ma'am," he said. "Someone from Casey's school just called. They're asking if they can use her clip. In their media ethics class." Crockett chuckled. "Tell them it's fine, just make sure they put her name on it." But just as things began to settle, Crockett would be faced with one last question. One she'd need to answer not in public, but in private. Later that night. Long after the offices emptied. And the Capitol lights dimmed. Crockett sat alone in her car. In the underground garage. Engine off. Phone silent. Just her, and the dark. She hadn't meant to stay this late. But she wasn't quite ready to head home either. For all the headlines. The tweets. The interviews she declined. And the praise she tried not to internalize. One question still hung in the air. Had she done the right thing? It wasn't about policy anymore. Not even about optics. It was deeper than that. She replayed the moment again in her mind. The woman's face. The tone in her voice. The way she framed herself as a truth-teller. While cutting off everyone else. The way the room froze. The choice to say nothing. And simply let security do its job. Was it strength? Or was it, in some people's eyes, censorship? She remembered something her grandmother used to say. You can't reason with people who came to cause a scene. But you can control what kind of scene they get. Jasmine wasn't trying to look powerful. She just didn't want to be part of the circus. Still, that line kept tugging at her. The line between standing up and shutting down. Just then, her phone buzzed. A single new message. Unknown number. She hesitated. Then opened it. I saw the full video. I was wrong about you. My daughter and I talked about it tonight. Thank you for showing her. That respect doesn't have to be loud. She stared at the message for a long time. Not because it changed everything. But because it reminded her. Why she started in the first place. It wasn't just about the bills or the votes. It was about the people. Who were watching from the sidelines. Wondering if anyone in power actually knew how to hold it with grace. Out in the world, the debate raged on. Clips being dissected by pundits. Op-eds calling her either a hero or a tyrant. The same old binary thinking. But in that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't thinking about politics. She was thinking about that mother. That daughter. And the interns who were watching her every move. The next generation. Learning that poise doesn't mean silence. And boundaries don't mean fear. She started the car and pulled out slowly. As she drove, she passed the white stone steps of the Capitol. Empty now. Quiet. But full of history. And history, she knew, wasn't made by the loudest person in the room. It was shaped by the ones who held the room together. No press cameras. No podiums. Just a woman who understood the cost of composure. In a time when outrage gets more clicks than truth. The next morning, she returned to work like nothing happened. But her staff noticed it. The steadiness. The clarity. She wasn't shaken. If anything, she was sharper. They moved forward, as always. And that in turn, Casey. She got a job offer 2 weeks later. From a nonprofit focused on civic education. She accepted. And when they asked her what moment made her want to do more, she didn't hesitate. That day in the courtyard, she said. When someone held her ground without yelling. And changed the story. Without trying to go viral. There's a lesson here. In a world where everyone is shouting, restraint feels radical. When people provoke, they expect noise. But sometimes, silence is the most powerful answer. And when someone refuses to be dragged into chaos, they don't lose the fight. They change the rules. The next time you see a headline that's only 12 seconds long, ask yourself what came before it. And if you find value in stories like this, stories that go deeper than the clip, and show the full picture, subscribe to the channel. There's more to talk about. And you won't want to miss what's next.